All right, guys, welcome back, and we're going to start now chapter 5. So chapter 5 is going to be real estate brokerage activities and procedures. Now, chapter 5 is going to be one of the big ones. There's 12 questions on the exam, but you need to make sure you put a lot of emphasis on this chapter because it's a big one. It's the biggest chapter in the book, to the point that it's got 3 main sections, meaning we have an advertising section, we have a escrow section, as well as a business entity section. So technically, take this entire chapter as 3 subsections within the chapter, and then, organize yourself accordingly. Okay, guys? So let's go ahead and get started. Now, on chapter 5, we're talking about, the first portion is going to be talking about brokerages, as well as advertisement laws and situations that we encounter when we're promoting ourselves. Okay, so first things first, what is a brokerage? What is a real estate brokerage? Let's establish sound foundation. So a real estate brokerage, all it is an establishment which brings together buyers and sellers, tenants and landlords to transact and be able to do real estate deals together and be able to, achieve their goals of selling, buying, renting, or leasing. Okay? Now, in order to have a brokerage office, there are 2 particular items that are needed when it comes to the building in itself. Can you guys think about what do you think that would be? I don't think it's anything necessarily you might know off the top of your head, but see if you can maybe come up with a little bit of logic there. But essentially, a brokerage office is going to be a building. It needs to have or be in a building of stationary construction, meaning it cannot be a mobile home, meaning it cannot be something that can be movable. It's got to be of stationary construction. Even your home, technically you can run a brokerage out of your home. The only thing is you have to designate it as your brokerage office. Now, also too, the other component is you have to have an enclosed room to run transactions and close deals and negotiations. So it's got to be of stationary construction, meaning it can't move, and it's got to have an enclosed room to close deals or do negotiations. Okay, so that's the requirements of a brokerage office. Now, branch offices. What do you think a branch office would be? If I was to ask you, take a guess of what a branch office would be. And it would be exactly probably what you're thinking. It would just be another office aside from the main headquarters. Any other offices would be a branch office from there. And think about it as like you have your main branch and then other branches around there. Okay? Also, you have, now before I actually continue to the next term, make sure you remember that a branch office, you have to submit paperwork and pay a fee to get that certificate or that permit opened. Now, the permit is not transferable, meaning that you cannot just take a permit or an approval for a branch office and now take that office to a different location and use the same permitting. No, you're going to have to resubmit a form, you're going to have to repay for the fees to move locations for the property. You know how it is. The state is going to want their money. Okay? So, but ultimately, you can close and open a branch office in the same location as long as the expiration of that permit or certificate hasn't passed. Remember, they usually give us 2 years, just like they would a license. But so technically, you like I said, you can open and close it as long as it's in the same location. But if you're looking at transfer locations, now that permit will not be transferable. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, next, we have a temporary shelter. Okay, so a temporary shelter is literally exactly what the words tell you. It is a temporary shelter, meaning you cannot run transactions out of there. You cannot close deals out of a temporary shelter, and nobody can be assigned to work out of a temporary shelter, because if you do, then that is technically a branch office, and now you're going to have to register it and do the whole proceeding. Now, usually a temporary shelter you're going to see in like subdivisions, big subdivisions that, the reps are taking the buyers to go look at a lot where they're going to put the property and get it built. Under those conditions, if the subdivision is very big, sometimes there are little outhouses or little trailers or little things around that in case it's raining, in case the weather is not permitting, you can take the buyer or the customer there for protection, for shelter. Hence the word temporary shelter. And again, nobody can be assigned to work out of there. You can have brochures. You can kind of take the customer there and explain things. But again, you cannot close or have somebody assigned to work at a temporary shelter because you will have to register as a branch office at that point. And it will be a violation. Okay? So now, we're going to move to office signs. So whenever you have a brokerage or a branch office, you gotta have an office sign in the front. Now, the office sign must include certain information, meaning it must include the trade name or the name of the brokerage. It must have right underneath the name of the broker as registered with the DBPR, and then underneath that, it must include the words licensed real estate broker. And it's got to be, they're very, very precise and sticklers with these particulars in the office sign. So there's two variations that they'll accept. They're going to say it's got to be licensed real estate broker or LIC period real estate broker. That is the only two ways. Anything else, if you have an extra period, if you have an extra letter, aside from those two, that's technically a violation now that they can hit you for. So definitely make sure that you stick to those particular names. Now be careful, because on the exam, they're going to try to give you different variations and try to confuse you by misspelling, adding an extra letter, missing a period. LIC period, real estate broker, or licensed real estate broker. Again, they're very, very precise with this, so you got to make sure you're correct. Okay? So now, do you think that you can put somebody else underneath the broker in the office sign, meaning put two people? What do you think? Yes or no? Well, the answer is yes. You technically can put another agent or another broker or somebody right underneath the broker. The only thing is, it's got to have a line or enough space to be able to differentiate the two people. And then all you have to put is the person's name, and then again, licensed real estate broker or, LIC period real estate broker. But the other person, just so you know, doesn't have to be a real estate broker. They could be a broker associate or they can be a sales associate. So be careful if all of a sudden on the exam they say something along the lines of, they give you like the office sign and then underneath they give you, let's say, a random person's name and put sales associates and tell you, what could go under there. Is that correct? And then they could put answers like, yes, it is correct. Or they could say no, because a sales associate cannot be in an office sign, or no, because blah, 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 blah. Just be careful, because anybody can be in the office sign as long as the broker of record or the main broker is first. So again, it could be a broker, it could be a sales associate, or it could be a broker associate that goes underneath the main broker. So don't get tricked on the exam thinking that it's all brokers that have to be in the office sign, because it's only the main broker that has to be there technically. Anybody else, could be anybody, as long as the broker approves to put them on there. Okay, guys? Make sure you're clear on that. All right. Next, we have advertising. Now we get into promotion and promoting ourselves. Now, we as agents, our responsibility as the owners of our business, because remember, we are like business owners in the real estate industry under the umbrella of the brokerage, but we operate as independent contractors 1099. So knowing that, we have to make sure that we abide by these particular rules. For example, you always, every time that you say, hey, I'm a real estate broker or I'm a real estate agent, Whether it's an ad, whether it's online, whether it's anywhere you advertise yourself, you must include the brokerage name that you belong to. Whatever your brokerage is, by law, every agent needs to disclose that. That is a violation called blind advertisement. That is the way I remember. Usually I'll put a hand in my face and I'm like, oh, I'm blind. Oh, blind advertisement. And that's my way of remembering. So start creating your little tricks and little ways that you can now start remembering the material, because it does help. And as we go through the course, I'll be teaching you different tricks, different ways that I use to remember my own material and that I've taught students over the years to make sure that we can facilitate that process of remembering. Because if you can tell yourself within the explanation, include the term, it creates a mental connection between the definition and the term, and it's a lot easier to remember it, and not as much memorization is needed. Okay? So next, so blind advertisement is when you do not include your brokerage name. So no matter what, you always have to include brokerage name. So if you see anybody on Facebook, social media, some print ad, somewhere along the lines that they're saying I'm a realtor or anything to do with real estate and the brokerage name is not on there, that's technically a violation. Now, whether they'll get reported or not, that's a whole different ballgame, because it's a very minor infraction, but technically an infraction nonetheless. So always, always, always put your brokerage name. Next, we have false advertisement, and that is exactly what we think it is. It's when you lie, deceit, or purposely try to get your customer to do something that is against their best interest or for your benefit alone. Okay? So that's pretty self-explanatory, false advertisement. The other one is blind advertisement, because you're blind as to where the agent, what the company that the agent belongs to. Okay? Now we move to internet advertisement. Whenever you're advertising online, not only are you going to have to advertise your brokerage, but you also have to include your point of contact, meaning phone number, email, ways for people to get in contact with you. That is the only requirement for internet advertisements. So it's for internet advertisements only. Okay? Again, brokerage and point of contact. Now, licensed selling property by owner. Okay? Do you guys believe that you need a license, or as the owner, do you have to disclose that you have a license or you're an agent? Do you think that, let's say you have an investment property you're looking to sell and somebody comes to buy, do you think you have to say, hey, I'm an agent? And if so, at what point do you think that has to be disclosed? Because as you, I'm sure, guessed, yes, we do have to disclose that we are licensed. The reason for that is the government wants fair competition, hence why we have antitrust laws. So by wanting fair competition and us having a license and being trained and having a company that is teaching us how to transact and how to learn the process, they look at it as if we have an advantage over your traditional customer, because, again, we know the ins and outs of contracts, the deals, how to resolve problems, how the numbers work. So the rule is, if you're selling your own property, you have to disclose that you're an agent once we enter into serious negotiations. That is the actual definition. When we enter into serious negotiations, now we must disclose that. Now, in real life, it's a line that we'll fiddle with depending on how the deal works, but you have to include it in the contract no matter what. So once you get into serious negotiations that you're preparing offers and things, now you're going to have to disclose it, because if it's not on the contract, you're going to get some sort of notification from title that you have to include it, because by law, we are licensed and we are required to disclose it. So, but just so you know, the definition states, once we enter into serious negotiations. All right? That's going to be selling property by owner for a licensee. Also, there's another way that we prospect people. We talked about putting things online. We talked about print ad that we have to put in our brokerage, well, in general. But ultimately, what is one of the most, not efficient, well, it is one of the most efficient, but at the same time, one of the most common ways that we prospect for customers? I'm going to give you 2-3 seconds to think about it and tell me what you think. What would be the most common way, or one of the most common ways that we reach out to our customers and contact them to try to solicit or look for business? And it's going to be the cell phone. Okay? Phone is one of the most common ways that we reach out and communicate and try to set up an appointment and try to get a deal going. The one thing that we have to be aware of when we're dealing with telephone solicitation or using the phone for cold calling or prospecting or anything like that is going to be our do not call lists. Okay? How many do not call lists do you think a customer can be in for the sake of real estate? They can be in 2. So they can be in the federal do not call list as well as the Florida or statewide do not call list. So technically they are 2. Okay? Now, when you are dealing with do not call lists, technically we cannot reach out to them to look for business if they're in that do not call list. Now, knowing that there's 2 different ones, it gives us 2 different options to proceed. Because, for example, the federal do not call list, there are no ifs, ands, or buts. Technically, we can't reach out to them. But on the local or statewide do not call list, there are 3 exceptions. Now we can reach the customer. Okay? Just so you're aware, though, the do not call list works from 8 to 9 p.m. And ultimately, again, it deals with not bothering the customer to solicit for business. But when we're dealing with a statewide do not call list, we want to make sure that we know our 3 exceptions, because statewide, we can exercise them and still reach out legally. While the federal, though, will always supersede state. Meaning, if we can technically reach out to the customer and they're in the federal one, we shouldn't be able to reach out, or we shouldn't reach out at all. But if they're only in the statewide do not call list, now depending on the scenario, we technically can. Okay? And the 3 exceptions are going to be, first, you have your for sale by owner exception. Meaning, if the homeowner or the seller is actively on the market, meaning they're putting their home for sale by owner, the way the state recognizes that is they're saying, oh, okay, well, they're in the market. They need buyers. So let's help them out and give you guys an exception that if you have a real buyer, that is the key, is none of that prospecting or previewing the property, because a lot of the times we'll use strategies where we'll tell the seller or for sale by owner, hey, I got a bunch of buyers that might fit your criteria, but I got to go look at the property first to see if it fits the criteria for my buyers. Now, that may work, but ultimately, if they're in their do not call list, we cannot use that tactic because we don't have a true buyer actually interested in the property. We're wanting to just kind of get them involved so we can meet them in person and then try to get that signature once we're in front of them. Because our goal is to always set the loan or set the appointment. Now that's more agent training, and you'll tackle it once you get your license, but I'm just kind of fitting you in so you can start understanding a little bit of kind of how that process works. All right? But again, if you have a true buyer that is actually interested in that seller's property and they're in the statewide do not call list, now we can reach out because they're in the market. Okay? Now, the next exception is going to be a prior customer exception, meaning if they've already been a customer of yours. If they've already been a customer of yours, then at that point, you can reach out to them and try to reestablish another business connection. The time frame on that is going to be 18 months. So think about that logically. If you've worked with them in the past, you already have a relationship, but you can reestablish that connection of business with 18-month time frame since they're in the statewide do not call list. Okay? And then the last exception is going to be when the customer reaches out to us directly. So let's say the customer has a question about their property or wants an estimate or wants something, and they open the lines of communication. Under that condition, now we have 3 months to go ahead and solidify that deal and secure that deal. Okay? So again, 3 months only if we don't know them and they reach out to us. And again, look at the logic. If we don't know them and they reach out to us, only 3 months. But in the chance that we do know them and worked with them in the past, 18 months because we already know them. So they're going to give us more time. So again, use that logic, guys. 18 months for somebody we know, 3 months for somebody we don't know. And they opened up the line. And then the last exception would be the for sale by owner when we have an actual buyer. All right? So that's going to be the 3 exceptions to the do not call list. So just so you guys, if you guys are wondering, okay, so does that mean that we have to look up every single number that we're ever going to dial? Well, the answer is technically yes. You are supposed to look at every number that you're going to be dialing to make sure that they're in the do not call list. Now, a lot of these companies and services that provide numbers for sale by owners, expired listing, things like that, if you go out of your way and pay for those services, in many occasions, they'll include it if they're in the do not call list or not, and they'll give you the option to exclude them from the dialing list that you're going to be utilizing. But a lot of the times, we won't know unless you sit there and manually go out and look at every number. A lot of the times, it's just easier to apologize and just, keep going, but it's strictly up to you because you're technically supposed to. So maybe you should look into those services that they already provide that, but ultimately it's upon the agent to make sure that you get your system and process ready so that way when you're doing that, you can make a decision and double check what you need to double check to make sure that you stay in compliance. All right? Now, let's see. Oh, and like I mentioned, even if we do get those exceptions, make sure that you know that if the customer tells us that they don't want us to call them again because even though we have the exception, they have the right to ask us to not call and we must comply. So that's kind of the caveat. Although we got the exception, if the customer tells us don't call me no more, we better comply because then at that point, we can get hit with a violation. Okay? Now, when it comes to email advertising, that's another way of contacting customers on a regular basis. And you see it all the time. I'm sure all of us have given a name, an email, and a number to a subscription of some sort. It's very common in today's marketing strategies that a lot of companies use. It's called, a lot of the times they call it a funnel. I don't know if you're familiar with online selling and the whole funnel value ladder and how that all works, but that's kind of where it all comes in. What is the one thing that every email, if you've ever noticed, at the very, very bottom, it'll have that although the company doesn't want to include, by law, they have to include it. Think about it. What is it in the little bottom? It usually is very tiny that gives you an option to do what? And the answer is going to be to opt out or unsubscribe. Because by law, whenever we have email campaigns or we do email advertising and email marketing, the law requires that whatever the company is gives the customer an option to unsubscribe or opt out and get out of the newsletter or of that email list. Now, companies don't want to obviously give you that option because they'd rather keep you there, but they have to by law. So that is the main thing with email advertising. We have to have that unsubscribe or opt out. Okay? So now that is going to conclude the advertisement portion of this chapter. Please make sure you devote some time into the advertising because there will be a good 3 or 4 questions coming from the advertising section since there are 12 coming from this chapter, and it could be more. So understand that section is not crazy hard, but you do need to make sure you understand what we discussed. Okay?